The music room at the end of the long western wing was a forgotten tomb until Kaito touched the keys. Every afternoon, as others rushed for the station, he stayed behind, sealing him away from the world. Kaito was a pianist who found comfort in the dark, a soul who felt his music was too fragile for the glare of public attention. To him, the piano wasn't an instrument for performance, but a vessel for his anxieties. Each note was a secret, a vibration resonating within his chest. He was content to be a phantom in the shadows, playing for the dust motes in the very last dying light. This solitude was shattered by Akari. She didn't just walk in, she arrived like a storm of light, carrying a vintage camera and claiming she could capture the soul of things. She didn't ask for his name, she simply raised her camera and waited for a high note to hang in the air before pressing the shutter. She told him his music had a color she had never seen before. While Kaito was a creature of the dark, Akari was a symphony of color, her energy infectious and her curiosity boundless. On the school rooftop, they traded dreams like shimmering stones as they sat on the cold metal bench overlooking the city. Akari showed him her photographs, moving trains and frost-covered leaves, explaining her need to see the world. In return, Kaito spoke of the suffocating weight and fear of the stage and the thought that his music would lose its meaning if heard by strangers. She became his muse, the one person who could make the ivory keys feel like a bridge. Yet, as seasons shifted toward winter, a chilling shadow loomed over their meetings. Akari, usually full of life, began to appear fragile. She started wearing oversized, colorful scarves that swallowed her thin frame, and a persistent dry cough became her constant companion. She would laugh it off with a smile, blaming the weather. But Kaito noticed the way her breath hitched and how her once steady hands trembled. Her skin took on a translucent pallor, making her look like a porcelain doll that might shatter at any moment. Driven by a need to anchor her to the world, Kaito began composing a melody for her. It was a beautiful piece that mimicked the rhythm of her heartbeat and the clicking of her camera shutter. It was his unspoken confession, the words he was too terrified to say to the stars above. He spent countless hours practicing in secret, his fingers dancing across the keys with a new sense of urgency as the melody grew stronger in his mind. Before we continue this journey of music and hidden truths, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. They eventually made a promise to meet at the Winter Festival. There, Kaito promised he would finally play his song for her. The night of the festival arrived with a biting wind and the first dusting of snow. Kaito stood at their designated meeting spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched the crowds, searching frantically for the flash of her vibrant scarf or the lens of her camera. But as the hours passed, the festive lights began to dim. Akari never came. Just as panic began to take hold, his phone buzzed. It was a draft message from Akari, an indication that she was typing at that very moment. He stared at the screen, his breath hitching, but before the words could form, the notification blinked and vanished. The silence that followed was colder than the winter air, leaving him standing alone in the silent falling snow, clutching his phone in despair. The silence following the festival wasn't just cold, it was heavy with a hollow premonition Kaito could not shake. He found himself running through the sterile corridors of the city hospital the next morning, the smell of bleach stinging his nostrils. The truth was a crushing weight. Akari hadn't missed the festival because of a change of heart. She was fighting for her life. Her mother stood in the hallway, eyes rimmed with red, explaining the reality Akari had hidden behind vibrant scarves and laughter. A chronic heart condition, a defect present since birth, had finally begun to claim its territory. Kaito felt a surge of guilt so intense it nearly buckled his knees. While he had been obsessing over his stage fright, she had been silently carrying the weight of her own mortality. When he finally entered her room, the sharp scent of antiseptic had replaced the crisp winter air they shared on the rooftop. Akari looked painfully small in the hospital bed, her skin blending into the bleached sheets, yet her eyes still held that defiant spark. She forbade him from wearing a mourning face. She insisted that his life, and more importantly, his music, must continue. Kaito became a permanent fixture in that room, a ghost haunting the bedside chair. He eventually brought his portable keyboard, playing softly so as not to disturb the other patients, his fingers tracing the melody he had written for her. Each note was a prayer he was terrified would go unanswered. During those long afternoons, Kaito noticed Akari was constantly typing on her phone, her thumbs moving with a frantic, shaky energy. Every time he leaned in, she would quickly flip the device over, a playful, tired smirk on her lips. She called it her surprise, a project that would explain everything when the time was right. Kaito wanted to believe there was plenty of time left for surprises, but the monitor's steady, rhythmic beep was a constant, cruel reminder of the ticking clock. As weeks bled into each other, the vibrant world Akari loved began to blur. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, she reached out blindly for his hand. She admitted the light was fading. Her vision was failing as her body struggled to prioritize its most vital functions. Kaito's heart shattered as he realized she would never again see the photographs she had captured. He took her hand and began to describe the sunset in vivid detail. He spoke of the molten gold melting into the horizon and how the clouds looked like lonely islands in a sea of fire. She listened with a peaceful smile, telling him his words were better than any camera lens. One night, the air felt thin. Akari leaned toward him, her voice a mere whisper. She told him she had stored her most important words in the cloud, a digital legacy waiting for him. She made him promise not to look for them until she gave the signal, or until she could no longer speak for herself. It was a terrifying admission of her own fragility. The music competition was only days away. Kaito told her he wouldn't go. He couldn't leave her side when her breath was so shallow. "It's my final wish, Kaito," she countered, her grip on his sleeve firm. "If you don't play, my soul won't have a place to go." Now he stood on the stage of the grand auditorium, the spotlight a blinding. Solitary eye. The grand piano sat before him, a black monolith in the center of the silent void. His heart was a frantic bird beating against his ribs. He adjusted his bench, his mind miles away in that hospital room. Then his eyes drifted toward the wings. There, standing in the shadows, was Akari's mother. She wasn't smiling. She was clutching Akari's phone to her chest, her face masked in a grief so profound it stopped Kaito's breath. In that moment, the silence of the hall felt like a tomb, and the weight of the device in her hands told a story Kaito was not yet ready to hear. The realization didn't come as a whisper. It arrived like a physical blow that robbed the air from Kaito's lungs. Looking at Akari's mother in the wings, he saw the way her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollowed by a loss that transcended language. He saw her trembling lips and the way she gripped her daughter's phone as if it were Akari's very hand. The truth crystallized in that heavy silence. Akari was gone. She had slipped away while he was walking toward the stage, her final breath perhaps coinciding with his very first note. For a heartbeat, Kaito's hands hovered over the keys, trembling with a paralysis that threatened to consume him. He wanted to scream, to run from the spotlight, but he remembered her voice calling this performance her final wish. If he stopped now, he would be betraying the soul that had ignited his own. He lowered his hands, and the first chord of the piece he had written for her rang out. It wasn't the technical mastery he had practiced. It was raw and visceral. The melody began as a mourning cry, a haunting sequence mirroring the hospital monitors. As the song progressed, it transformed. It captured the vibrant color of her scarves, the rhythmic click of her camera, and the sunset he had described to her failing eyes. The judges looked on, forgotten. As the auditorium became a cathedral of grief and celebration intertwined, the audience sat in a silence so profound the world seemed to hold its breath. Tears tracked down Kaito's face, dripping onto the ivory, but he didn't stop. He played until his fingertips throbbed, pouring every unspoken word into the piano. When the final note faded, there was no immediate applause, only the collective sob of a room witnessing a soul laid bare. The weeks that followed were a gray blur. The competition was over, but Kaito felt no victory. He stopped playing entirely. The piano in the school music room remained locked, its keys gathering dust. To Kaito, the music had died with Akari. Without his muse, the ivory felt like cold stone. He spent his days wandering their old spots, staring at the empty rooftop, feeling her ghost in every gust of wind. It was only when Akari's mother visited that the silence finally broke. She handed him the phone, explaining that Akari had spent her final days obsessed with a single folder in her notes, making her mother promise it would eventually reach him. Kaito sat on his bed, the device feeling impossibly heavy. He opened the folder titled "The Message I'm Afraid to Send." It wasn't one text, but a series of unsent drafts spanning months. Some were short observations about the way he played, others were heartbreaking confessions of her fear. He read about the day they met and how she had seen the loneliness in his posture. He read her apologies for the secrets, but it was the final draft, time-stamped only an hour before her passing, that rebuilt him. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a manifesto. Akari wrote that she wasn't afraid of leaving, but she was terrified he would stop playing because of her. She told him that every time he touched the keys, she would be listening from the stars. "Don't let the music end with me, Kaito," the message pleaded. "Play so I can find my way home." The realization washed over him like a baptism. His music wasn't a tribute to tragedy, it was a bridge to a living memory. Kaito returned to the school roof that evening, carrying his keyboard. He didn't play for an audience or a grade. He played for the wind and for the girl who had seen the soul in his songs. He looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky, realizing that his music was no longer a solitary escape, but a conversation that spanned between the earth and the heavens. As the melody echoed across the skyline, a brilliant light flickered in his eye, a sharp flash from the distance, like the ghost of a camera shutter capturing one perfect moment. Kaito smiled through his tears, his fingers moving with newfound purpose, knowing that as long as he played, she would never truly be gone.